This is the Jedburgh podcast. I'm the host, Fran. Each episode, I speak with transformative leaders, visionaries, drivers of change, and those dedicated to winning, no matter the challenge. The Jedburgh podcast is founded in the lineage of the Special Operations Jedburgh teams of the past and is sponsored by Talent War Group, an executive search and talent advisory. Visit talentwargroup.com for more. A percentage of all proceeds is dedicated to the Special Operations Warrior Foundation. I like to think I'm funny. Some people, maybe they agree. Others, they probably don't. But I'm certainly no comedian, and there's no way that I would make it in the New York City stand-up comedy world. My guest this episode is comedian and author Selena Coppock. Selena's album, Seen Better Days, hit number 1 on the iTunes comedy chart, and she's ranked one of the 8 funniest feminists on Twitter. She joins me to unpack the leadership characteristics required to stand up in front of total strangers and evoke an emotional response. She showed me the differences between improv and a team's ability to hide your flaws versus stand-up, where there's no one but yourself to blame for failure. She explained how you pick yourself up off the floor, forget about the times the audience threw tomatoes, and grab the mic for another round. Selena and I also discussed her book, The New Rules for Blondes, where we challenge stereotypes about women, their place in society, and how we can all learn to shine if we believe in ourselves first. Selena, welcome to the Jedburgh podcast.
Hey, thank you. Happy to be here, Fran.
You are a comedian, you're an author, you're a podcast host, you're a publisher, and you do all of these things, and you have this amazing day job, and each one of these is this career in itself, but you manage to find success in all of them. And I said, I need to get you on and we got to have this conversation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm so glad you reached out. I was so touched. And also, it's funny because sometimes you do all these things and you don't realize how much you're doing until someone lists them back to you.
Yeah, you think, well, I was just trying to, I don't know, do the things I wanted to do, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And then when you think of the cumulative effect of wow, no, that's quite a lot of things, it's kind of remarkable.
Well, let's start with the comedy piece. I think about comics and I think about Ellen DeGeneres, Kate McKinnon, Jerry Seinfeld, Chris Rock, Sarah Silverman. I mean, huge names in the comedy space. And we laugh and we get up there and we loosely wonder about how they thought of certain jokes or how they thought of a story. And I wonder, how did they experience that? And then they're able to tell this story that resonates in this way that makes me laugh. I never would have thought that. But we really do take for granted the amount of work that it took for them to get there and actually make those experiences funny. There's an intense amount of pressure as well that I would imagine comedians go through to actually perform and perform night in, night out, just like we see with professional athletes, right? You see this a lot. You have to perform night in, night out at a certain level to get a response, not to mention the incredibly long, hard road to even finding someone who's going to put you on stage, give you the audience, and be able to actually, you eventually produce an album, but be able to actually get out there and improve your craft. And so I think about the 9 characteristics of elite performance as we define them here on the Jedburgh podcast and in Special Operations Forces, and drive, resiliency, adaptability, humility, integrity, effective intelligence, team ability, curiosity, and emotional strength. And becoming a comedian really does require all of these traits. And so I want to frame the conversation with these core tenets in mind, but really unlock, how do you become successful in this very competitive but also subjective industry? And you joke in your album that everyone has a dream of moving to New York City and becoming a stand-up comic. And one publication that I read about comedy said that New York City is where comedians are born funny, become funny, or arrive to thrust their funny upon us. And so I am curious as how you decide to leave this small suburban Boston town, come to New York City and pursue this dream.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, I think mine started like a lot of people. Every college has an improv group, for better or for worse. And so when I went to college in upstate New York, Hamilton, and I did improv there. And improv is it's a good on-ramp to a lot of types of comedy. It's sort of, you make it up on the spot, you're collaborating with other people, there's just a fun team atmosphere to it. And from that, I mean, a lot of people stay doing improv. I mean, that's like the UCB, the Upright Citizens Brigade Theater, their whole thing is improv. But from improv, I discovered stand-up. And I found immediately stand-up made so much more sense to me. the sort of solitary nature of it I really like. And I mean, there's a community, but you're up alone on stage, which I really like. But I mean, as far as brass tacks, why did I go to New York? It was after college, I lived in Chicago for 1 year doing improv, and then moved back to, was living in South Boston, was like hanging out with old Weston hometown pals, and was working in publishing, and I got laid off from my job. And I was about 2 years into stand-up. I just started in Boston, in Harvard Square, above the Hong Kong, which is sort of where I came up. And so I got laid off from my job, and I was sort of 2 years into stand-up. And if you're serious about stand-up, you have to go to New York or LA, really. I mean, like, I think it's really wise to cut your teeth in a smaller market and kind of figure out your voice, kind of get comfortable on stage, get maybe 15 minutes in your back pocket, just so you have enough material to kind of go somewhere else. But then I think it's wise you have to make the leap to New York or LA, because that's really where the opportunities are. It's where you can get a ton more stage time. You can really be hustling. So when I got laid off from my job, my good friend who was my boss at the time, Anathea, bless her heart, she was like, Selena, you seem like you're frustrated with stand-up in Boston and you work in publishing during the day. So like New York is the answer, like there's so much publishing and there's so much stand-up, and those are the two things you want. So I mean, I'm a firm believer that like when you the universe will open up to you when you're on the right path, like it will make everything easy. Like the year that I lived in Chicago, I was on the wrong path. It was difficult. Everything was hard. Like random bad, frustrating things would happen to me. And when I decided to move to New York, every door opened to me. Like my uncle was like, hey, I have an extra bedroom in my apartment on the Upper East Side if you would want to crack. And I I was able to do a freelance job to cover some money at the time. Like, all these doors open. And then I got my first job in New York, I was a children's editor for Barnes & Noble Corporate, which was such a fascinating job. I mean, to see how you decide what goes where in a Barnes & Noble, how the buyers make their calls, to deal with British packagers from Italy. I mean, it was such a great job. But really, the universe was like, this is where you're meant to be. I mean, in New York, it's such a great place to really hustle in comedy, because you can be out every night doing an open mic and then a show and then another open mic. And there's so many stages to get on. There's so much to do. It's such a buzzing community. And especially at that time, I moved to New York in late 2006. And, I ran a show on Avenue B in the East Village for a while, and literally it would like rain through the ceiling. I mean, it was like, we were all just like so scrappy and just like putting on shows anywhere you could have one. I mean, I used to run a show. I took some sketch writing classes at UCB. And my sketch class, we all decided to run a show together in the basement of a pizzeria on Monday nights at 11 p.m., which like...
Did you get an audience?
Yeah, always. I mean, yeah, and it was like, who's coming out on a Monday night at 11 p.m.? But we did, that's why comedy in New York works so well, because there's always foot traffic. You can always, we call it barking, where you just go onto the street and you're like, hey, come on in, we have a comedy show, just to bark people into your show. I mean, there's so many like degrading terms in comedy.
And
but
you don't know who's going to be there either. Like that's another piece of this thing, right? I mean, I think about some of these clubs, right? The Comedy Cellar, Comic Strip Live, Gotham Comedy Club, The Creek and the Cave, which was in Long Island City, which rest their soul. They have since moved.
I know now they're in Austin. God.
Yeah. But I mean, these places, and I think you see it a lot online or on TV, like there will be A-list comics who will go into these places and they'll go up, 5, 10, 15 minutes to test new stuff, or they're in the crowd. If you're an up and coming aspiring comedian, it's a small stage, maybe in sense of it's not very big in square footage, but you may have a real audience of A-list personality who's sitting right there in the audience listening to you.
Oh, totally. And you never know who might be there, like I have a lot of friends who they got their agent because their agent was there to see their client, but the agent saw this person and was like, oh, let me sign you too, Or, I mean, I remember when I got to the point where if you went to a comedy club or a show just to hang out or to support a friend, you're going to be asked to do, do you want to do some time? And so you kind of had always better be ready to do some time, and do okay. And maybe you're working out some new stuff. I mean, but it's sort of, you want to always be in the mix and always be like, sure, I'll do 5, I'll do 10. Okay. If the headliner's running late, somebody might be like, hey, comedians who are here in the back of the room, we want to, just do a quick set because we got to
somebody get up there and start talking.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, truly. It's so funny. So you always got to have a set in the back of your mind, which you always do. I mean, that's the thing, is you always have jokes swirling around in your head. You're always working on stuff. You always have your notebook with you, of course. And then some people would carry around recording devices, but you're kind of always hustling. always running around.
So standing up on that stage, it's alone. I mean, it's just you, which requires a tremendous amount of courage. And there's got to be this sense of extreme confidence that I would imagine comes from preparation, right? Something we talked a lot about in the military. You got to train the fundamentals daily. You got to do the core tasks every single day to a foundational level. And that preparation is what then gives you the confidence to take on more difficult and advanced tasks. So we've spoken a lot about individual requirements to perform in the heat of the moment in other episodes. Laura Wilkinson, the Olympic gold medalist from the 2000 Games, talked about it in platform diving, where it was just her, 33 feet in the air. At that point, just like you're on stage because you've earned the right to be there and compete now. But now actual execution, there's nowhere to look. Dr. Claudius Conrad talked about in surgery, there's zero margin for error once you put your hands on that patient. Jerry Remy, he talked about it with closing pictures, right? There's no one left. It's you're on the mound. Yeah. You now have to perform. And so results in these other professions, these non-comedy, athletic, surgery, I feel like they're very objective, meaning that some tangible result is going to happen because of this person's action. Comedy to me seems subjective, where comedians, they have to evoke an emotion from the audience. They first have to create a connection when they get up there, and then they have to make that audience feel something, which then that audience is going to express that feeling through laughter, right? And so that purely subjective piece of this, I feel like can also be affected by anything, right? Your look, what you're wearing as a comedian, your voice, right? You may get up there and someone just says, I can't stand her voice. I don't want to listen to this. The temperature in the room, the mood, their blind date, right? Oh, I'm on a bad date. I'm not having fun. Now, whatever this person is up here telling me, I'm not going to take it in the way that I normally would. Is their drink full, their political affiliations, nationalities, gender, race? It seems like anything can affect the mood of the person receiving that. And so I'm interested in knowing, how do you actually get up there when you come up on that stage, right? The curtain opens, you step out there, you grab the mic, the lights are in your eyes, you're nervous, the audience is nervous, nobody really knows what they're going to get on each side of that equation, but now it's go time. And you've said that there's no feeling more powerful than standing alone on the stage, completely unencumbered, microphone in hand, sharing your thoughts or experiences, and knowing that maybe you are instigating change in some small way. So what is that moment?
Yeah. Oh my God. I mean, you make it sound so wonderful and powerful, which in many ways it is, I mean, even if it's just silly stuff, but gosh, I feel like there's so many directions I want to go with all of this. I mean, first off, let's talk about the solitary nature of it. Like, that's my favorite part, because I think I was in a sketch comedy group where it was three of us, writing short scenes together. I've done that before. And then I've been in many improv teams. And in improv especially, like, I'm sure this is going to, make the improv community hate me, but there's so much dead weight. And like a lot of really bad improvisers are able to kick around and they get hidden by the fact they're in a team. And like the team can pull them up and they can really be terrible, but they're okay. Like they're kind of covered by the team nature of it. And I love that in stand-up, it's just, like you're really on your own. And that's really powerful and wonderful. I mean, and it really enables you to be nimble. In other formats, it's hard. Like if the set isn't going well, there's sort of nothing you can do about it. I mean, if you're a band and you're playing your music and this audience just doesn't like your music, well, sorry, this is our music, And with stand-up, as if you have, all your material swirling around your head all the time, you can change course. Like you could start in on some pop culture jokes, but this isn't hitting. Maybe it's older people who don't sort of consume the same media that you consume. So you can pivot to maybe a more universal story of something funny that happened to you. Like I really like that you can adjust. And as you get, the longer you're in stand-up, the more you can kind of read a room immediately. Like
the feedback's instantaneous.
Exactly. Yeah, the feedback's instantaneous. And from that, you're always sort of recalibrating. Like if you were planning on doing this 7-minute chunk that you're working on, if you're preparing it for a specific event, you'll just plow through and keep going. But, if you start in and, you do your usual opening joke and I mean, you're just always sort of recalibrating of like, okay, is this hitting? If not, maybe I go in this direction. But it is, I mean, I love that you mentioned that it is subjective because that's something that I think helps. If you have a bad set, that really helps to sort of be able to keep your head above water, because you're like, this is subjective. I mean, maybe some people just don't enjoy a true story that I just told, or they're not aware of this funny thing. So like the premise of the joke was not understandable, so the joke itself sort of didn't work. Like there's so many, I mean, it's nice that you don't really take things personally because it's so subjective. But also, like, yeah, there's so many elements that can affect it, as you were saying. Like, for example, even where you are in the lineup. Like, if it's an hour-long show and you're in the beginning, sometimes the audience isn't quite warmed up yet. Like, the sweet spot is 3/4 of the way through the show. Like, that is where you could be, like, not even a great comedian, and if you go in that slot, it's going to be an easier street than it is if you're in the very beginning. And it depends, did the host of the show get the crowd warmed up and going? You know, like, I mean, a good host will take the show on his or her back and basically like, I'm doing all the work, you guys follow me. You know, like it's like being sort of a tour guide or like a counselor. And a good host will make everyone's sets go really well because the host is getting the audience ready. They're getting them worked into a lather. They're sort of setting expectations. They're introducing them well. I mean, there's such an art to like how to introduce somebody and bring them up on stage. And if the host brings you up on stage and you're feeling good and they've hit the introduction right, for example, like it's just, like you sort of say what they've done before, but the last thing you say is their name and then you bring them up. And like, it's got to be in that order. If it's not in that order, everything gets screwed up. But then when you go out there, I mean, there's so many variables at play. Like even if the audience is close to you or not physically, if the audience is physically far away from you, it's just really, I find the timing gets kind of screwy and it's hard to build that electric kind of connection. Like, I mean, the club where I started out, the Comedy Studio in Harvard Square, which is now Inman Square, the audience is like, the stage is like the size of a thimble and the audience is right on top of you and it's perfect. Like,
it's personal.
Yes, yeah. And the like, it's just, yeah, exactly. Like it's right here. And ideally, I mean, you almost want like a low ceiling. Like, I think like, I mean, that's why COVID was so decimating to comedy because it's like, the ideal setting for comedy is a COVID nightmare. You know, it's just people on top of each other, right on top of you with a low ceiling. You know, like that is a perfect setting for comedy. And
laughing and spitting in people's faces.
Exactly. Like, oh God, this is not going to work. You know, I mean, truly, like, I feel like comedy just took such a blow because, yeah, we all want to be like in a dingy basement together. Like, but yeah, I mean, there used to be a club in New York where the audience was, the stage was really high and the audience was kind of far away from you. And we would talk about it in the green room and be like, it just would screw up your pacing sometimes because it was a really long, narrow room. And that can really screw up your pacing because it just seems like sometimes your jokes are almost like a wave and the wave has to crash over the audience. And if it takes a long time to get out there, like you just got to slow down and be patient. But if you're someone like me, where I'm very fast paced on stage, I'm very sort of hyper on stage, it can really like, that stage would sometimes screw me up, and it took me a while to adjust to the pacing of that stage in particular. But I mean, how bonkers to be like, you've got to be mindful. Like, there's so many things that you've got to be mindful of. Like, okay, I'm trying to read the room. What will this audience like? You also are mindful of like, how should I do my pacing based on the space, literally the spatial relations of the room. And you think about what you're wearing and how you look. I mean, I started wearing glasses on stage probably 10 years ago, and I needed to. I mean, it's, I needed to see in order to see the audience because I'm nearsighted.
We all get older. It's okay.
Exactly. But I found that wearing glasses on stage really helped me. Like the audience just saw me in a different light, because before that I was just like a cute blonde girl telling jokes. And there was something about the glasses that I just felt like the audience saw me more as a contender. I think it's so tricky in stand-up. It's a reason why I think it's so it is, I think, uniquely challenging for women in stand-up because there's this, I think that people are able to consume comedy from someone they don't want to fuck. Like, I just think that sometimes that really works. And if you now, and a lot of audiences for stand-up, I think a lot more guys go to watch stand-up than women. And there's sometimes like just something that's so, if you're a cute young woman, there are some guys who they just don't want to hear it. Like they don't want to hear jokes from a woman who they think is hot. Like there's just, and I know probably this is like, not kosher to say, but I just figured I'd be extremely candid because also I think I'm sort of pulling away from the world of comedy anyway. But yeah, I like just the glasses thing really changed I think how I was perceived. But yeah, I mean, all of that, like if people would I have a friend who used to do stand-up in his suit from work. And I think that really changed, like influenced what the audience thought of him and saw how they saw him. So you have to be mindful too, of like what you wear. And, if your stage persona is sort of more rock, like my stage persona was a little like, it was high energy, but also kind of rock and roll. So I would often go into work in one outfit and then change for the night for my sets, just to feel like you kind of want to give the audience a shorthand to understand you, because they really need to understand who you are and sort of your identity and what you're bringing, and then you go into your set. And now they understand. So often your opening joke is establishing who I am and just sort of introducing yourself to the crowd. And of course, like you don't want to be, there's the sort of template for jokes of like, here's who I am. I'm a combination of this actor and this actor. And like, that's often like an opening joke for people when they're kind of green in comedy. And it seems like a very kind of rookie move, but it serves a purpose to sort of introduce yourself to the audience and tell you who you are. Because at first they need you to take them by the hand and be like, okay, here's who I am. And part of that taking the audience by the hand is also like, having that confidence, or at least showing them you're in good hands. I know what I'm doing. We're going to have a blast. Don't you worry.
I like this conversation about having to structure your content, right? Because most comedians develop their own content. And not only do you have to develop it, but then you have to perfect it. You have to execute it. And you're really responsible for this whole cycle, right? There's no one else. There's not really anyone else to blame, right? Oh, they wrote me a bad joke. Okay, well, no, not really. I mean, you wrote the bad joke and then you actually got up there and performed it. And so you have to go through this evaluation process to understand what is a good joke, what's too much. And so I want to ask you a bit about that, because you got a couple of quotes here that I really like, because it ties back into how do you actually create a plan, right? And do you create a plan that matches what you're trying to do? And one of them is good social commentary uses satire to turn the issue on its head and make you think in a different way than you did before. And that's coming from you. And we live in difficult times right now. They're really polarizing in so many ways, and tensions are high, and there's significant sensitivities around race, gender, politics, the pandemic, the economy. But I feel like we turn to comedy for an outlet, and we look at comedians as somebody who can go up there and they have this creative license to kind of say and do on the stage really almost whatever they want. And we don't really think about the fact that what they're saying on the stage may really be inappropriate or insensitive, because we've given this ability to go out there and kind of make us think about things that we normally may not want to think about, but in a different light. And then every once in a while you see backlash that will come back onto a comedian for something that they may have said or did. And you also said that if a comedian chooses to write jokes about contentious issues, he or she had better play at the top of his or her intelligence and craft those jokes with a lot of care and imagination. The problem with a lot of jokes about hot button issues is that they are sometimes written by comedians who don't bother to consider the sophisticated dynamics at play, unquote. Are there topics that are off limits, and how do you actually approach these sensitive topics? And I ask this because a lot of times in our conversations, we talk about getting comfortable having uncomfortable conversations. And how do you as a leader actually bring things up that people, they don't want to talk about? It affects them, right? It evokes an emotion that they don't want to bring into the workplace. They don't want to bring into their relationships. They don't want to bring into their family, but you have to have those conversations. And comedians do a great job of getting up there and having conversations about the most difficult things. And it invokes laughter from so many different people.
I mean, I think I always say, I mean, in comedy, we used to every 6 months have a debate. Can people make jokes about rape? Like, are rape jokes ever okay? And my theory has always been no topic should be off limits. Like, everyone has been affected by different things. Like, for one person, the Holocaust is a really hot button issue. For another person, it's 9/11. For another person, it's rape. For another person, it's cancer. And, I mean, if you have an audience of 100 people, you can't somehow not offend anyone. Like, you will somehow, like, that's an assortment of different traumas and histories and issues people have been affected by. And there's no way, I mean, you can't please everyone. But what you can do is be mindful of sort of your position in things and what is perceived as your position in things, and whether you're punching down. And I mean, that's sort of a gold standard of comedy. We talk a lot about how you really can't punch down. And that means it's not fair wherever your position is within the white supremacist patriarchy where we live. it's really not much fun and it's not enjoyable to punch down. So it's not funny homeless people for me. I have a home, and it's not funny for me to make fun of homeless people just in a way that is simply cruel and simply hurtful and painful. Like ideally, the structure of a good joke is, yeah, everything's sort of flipped around. And ideally, you're being self-effacing. So a funny joke for me to make that concerns a homeless person might be like that I'm digging through the trash and a homeless person sees me and is like, get it together. Like you need to be kind of the lower man on the totem pole. And I think that this is why I think there's a lot of white straight men in comedy are sort of, they're like, I can't say anything anymore. Everything, PC police coming to get me. Because white supremacist patriarchy, they're the top dog. And so it's hard to not punch down if you're the top dog because everything is down. You know what I mean? But I think for that reason, it's important to, like, I find the funniest jokes are ones where someone is sort of mocking themselves, like making fun of, like I get no respect type of thing, where it's like someone being self-effacing, someone being the butt of the joke, and they are the butt of the joke. And that's what, like, my favorite type of stuff. Like on my album, I have a joke about filming a role on that TV show Red Oaks and how they basically reached out to me and were like, we're looking for a trash bag. And I was like, got it, like, to me, that's the best form of comedy, and I just think the worst thing in comedy is when people who are not thoughtful or bright will try to hit on hot button topics without understanding now you're punching down, or like you want to have 9/11 in a joke, but you're making it like you're already reinforcing the dynamic of what happened that day. Like the funniest things are ones where it's sort of flipped on its head. Like I used to have a joke that referenced 9/11. It's not a joke about 9/11. It's a joke about how, like, after Osama bin Laden was caught, everyone, went down to Ground Zero to celebrate. And I was like, I can't go down there. It's too upsetting. My ex-boyfriend lives in that neighborhood. And, and people, and I was just like, oh, like, and people would, I remember a guy came up to me after a show once and he's like, I'm from New York City. Don't ever do that 9/11 joke again. And I was like, it's not even about 9/11. It's about me being obsessed with my ex-boyfriend, but sometimes people can't even parse what the joke's about. But that's like a joke about a hot button topic that doesn't work. Sometimes it's hard to like kind of figure out why doesn't this work? And it's usually because it's being cruel to the people who already were victimized by this. Like the best type of joke about a hot button topic would be flipping that dynamic around. Does that make sense? Am I making
it? Does. No, absolutely. I mean, it's the presentation of it in a way that's going to resonate with the majority of that audience. And that's probably the difficult part, as you mentioned, right? You don't know who's sitting out there in that audience, right? You don't know what are the one things. And so you kind of have to look across the whole audience and say, all right, well, I'm going to be okay that some people may not like this, but there may be a part later on in this where this person who liked the first half doesn't like something in the second half, but the other people who didn't like the first will like the second half. There's definitely this need for this self-reflection, introspection to analyze your performance, right? And that's hard, right? Because I'm sure comics, just like the rest of us, especially if you're a type A personality who puts a lot of work, a lot of preparation into this set, the expectation every time you take that stage is, I'm going to knock this thing out of the park. Everyone's going to laugh their ass off. They're going to love it. But then you get up there and it's just crickets, right? And you're like waiting for the tomatoes.
Oh, I know. I mean, and I will say this, any set where like I find stand-up to be so unpredictable sometimes, because you can prepare all you want. You can have your set prepared. But like I've had shows where I walked into the show having a bad feeling. I was in a bad mood. I had a bad day. And then on stage, it was like fire. It was some of the greatest sets of my life. And then the other side of that coin, I've had sets where I'm feeling good. I'm so excited about these new jokes. And the audience seems like they're hot and is terrible. I mean, it's sort of hard to predict. And I found that especially sometimes I would have a bad day and I would be zonked and exhausted and I didn't want to do a show or a set. And it would end up being great. And it was such a boost. And it was like, God, I'm so glad that I didn't lean into that bad day and like cancel the show or, it was often like 10 minutes on stage that would totally turn my day around. And like, just to go back to what I was saying before, I don't want anyone to think that I'm some sort of like shock jock who's like, hey, everyone's going to get offended. I don't care. Like, that's really, my theory of comedy is people came out and they got a babysitter maybe, and they came out and they paid however many dollars and they're drinking some overpriced Bud Lights. And I think they are owed a night of like enjoyment and pleasure and silliness and happiness. I mean, the majority of my jokes are, I love silly stuff. I like stuff that's sort of fantastical. Like I love sort of the three sort of heightening to an absurd degree with jokes. I think if certain comedians want to tangle with crafting a joke about 9/11, cool, good luck. But the majority of my jokes that I like to do are really like just fun, silly stuff that everyone's included. No one, they're not mean to anyone in particular because I don't know. I just really was always honored that like people came out for a show and I want to give them a wonderful night and make them happy.
I think about the words humility, resiliency, adaptability, and emotional strength. Can you accept that it's going well or it's going not, right? It's easy to accept when it's going well, harder to have the humility to say it's not. Resiliency, because you got to stick with it. You can't quit, right? You can't just say, oh, it's not going well. I think about when I was a young kid, I had to be about, 8 or 10. I was in a piano recital and I started the piece and about maybe 10, 15 seconds in, I messed up and I literally stopped and I looked at the audience and I said, I didn't do that right. I'm going to start again. And everybody laughed. But in a way, as nervous as I was the first time, it kind of took the nerves out, right? Because I messed up. But so you got to kind of be resilient. And maybe you really, in stand-up comedy, you probably can't stop and say, okay, I really suck right now. Let me start over, right? And you got to have this adaptability to understand how, like you talked about, how do you change your set? How do you find something and identify it's not working and then change it? And then the emotional strength to not lose focus, right?
Yeah.
And so I think about bounce back and this concept of bounce back that we talk a lot about, where you have to have a short memory because you may do, 1, 2, 3 sets a night. You may, as you talked about, that drive and that get out there every single night and constantly perform. You can't think about the fact that last night it went so poorly. And so how do you do that? How do you reset mentally and emotionally? And even if you're at the verge of getting the tomatoes thrown at you, and say, okay, I got to get up and do this, but then also become complacent when it goes well. Because it's very easy to walk off the stage, have that euphoric feeling that you talked about, and then expect that, well, the next time I get up there, obviously I'm going to kill this crowd too.
Yeah. Oh, totally. Yeah. I mean, to answer literally first and then sort of metaphorically, I mean, literally, sometimes people will say, tough crowd, and that will get the crowd to laugh. And then we're all admitting to what's happening. It kind of shows like, I'm aware of what's happening. This isn't going well. And usually you get one tough crowd per set. But I've seen somebody say tough crowd a few times during a set when it's not going well. And like, there's just like, people will forgive you one thing and they'll kind of check in one time. But if you keep doing it, the audience now hates you. I know some of the old pros, the old road dogs of comedy will say you never admit that when it's going badly. You just keep on going, and you always act like it's going well, like always keep your head up, always act like it's going great, even when you're eating shit. But I do subscribe to that somewhat, but I also think that sometimes the audience wants you to know, hey, I'm here too, and I'm in this together, and we're all present. So sometimes like a little joke or a little check-in can be fun, where you're like, what, you guys aren't from the East Coast? Okay. And then on to the next, But I think metaphorically, I remember when I was young in comedy hearing, I forget if it was an interview or someone overheard it, but there's that comedian Rich Voss, who's very funny. And he said to some young comedians, I think it was at a comedy contest, and some people had won the comedy contest and some people had lost, which is so absurd because how do you rate art, but whatever. But he said to them, he goes, congrats to those who won, condolences to those who lost. Just so you all keep in mind, none of this matters. And I mean, and I just thought it was so great, but he meant, if you won, congrats. Tomorrow, you might have a terrible set. And if you lost, that's tough. But tomorrow, you might have an amazing set. Everything is ever changing. And I mean, when I sort of got out of my head about comedy and bad sets is when I started performing a ton. Because you have a bad set Tuesday? Okay, I got another show Wednesday. It's just, knowing that you're always no one show is the be all end all. And that's why the best place to be scouted for something is when you don't even realize a big person's in the audience. My favorite shows were ones where I didn't know anyone there. I just sort of, maybe I had another show before, so I zipped in late, jumped on stage, hey, and then left. Those are the most fun, where you're not in your head about it. And it's all but it's sort of, that you learn stand up 10 minutes at a time. where you can just do it no matter what. That's when you really develop that mastery because you're not so precious with it. Every show, I got another show. And so you develop a thick skin. Like if things don't go well at your 7:00 Tuesday show, okay, I'm going to get up at 9 and maybe they're going to like me. Like you really can't beat yourself up over it. And it's too bad because I think when you're young in comedy, you don't perform very much and you don't yet know that it's not personal. Like it can be so painful. Like I remember taking the subway home after bad shows when I was young in comedy and just like, it's humiliating. It's so painful. And and you didn't yet have the thick skin to be like, fuck them. In stand up, I'm sorry, I feel like I'm swearing like a sailor. I hope that's not against the rules.
No, it's okay.
But, in stand up, we often say like, fuck them if they can't take a joke. You just kind of gotta be, like resilient and have that sort of self-belief of like, I think I'm really funny. I enjoy what I'm doing, especially as a woman in comedy. I always felt it was very important and powerful to represent women in comedy and to show audiences who thought probably that they didn't think women could be funny, or if, I would walk on stage and I could see guys just putting their hands over their chest, kind of like, oh, let's see. Like, and I thought I was always that was such fire in my belly to be like, I gotta hustle and I gotta do this thing because comedy does not belong to men. It is not simply for men. Everyone needs to be here and everyone needs to be represented. And like even if, I've had sets where it didn't go very well, but somebody might come up to me after and be like, hey, it seemed like a tough room, but I was with you and I really thought it was funny. And it's like, that's just nice for,
Makes you feel good.
Woman. Yeah, exactly. And to know like, okay, well, one young woman who thinks that comedy is a male space, she saw a woman and she thought that woman was great. And that's really powerful.
So you created the album and you recorded the album. It's called Seen Better Days, which is quite funny. I listened to it the other day. And knowing you, and it's really this chronicle of your life, but it's told, you kind of tell this bio through this very, very humorous way through these series of stories. What was the driving reason behind the album? And when we spoke in preparation for this, we're going to talk about the book in a few minutes, but you actually told me that the album was really a defining moment for you and something that you're most proud of. How come?
Yeah, the album I'm so proud of. It came out in December 2017. Yeah, early December 2017. It's called Seen Better Days. Hey. And I wanted to do an album because often in comedy, we talk a lot about having closers. Like you have bits, you have jokes that are your big closing joke because you want to end as strong as you can. So often the structure of a set will be, you'll do a tried and true joke first, you'll put your new stuff in the middle, and then you'll close on a tried and true because you want to go out strong. And a lot of my closers are long and they're drawn out. I sort of wanted to do an album because I wanted to get my closers, kind of these old closers, I wanted to get them recorded for sort of the sake of like my own historical sake, but also because, these are closers I was kind of tired of using. And I was like, I want to kind of put these on the shelf in a formal way and have them memorialized. I was also driven to do an album, after Donald Trump was elected. Like, I was very upset. I was sort of heartbroken. And I was like, I need to do something to just sort of consume my mind and something that feels like I just need to do something for me and really have this art be a historical piece where I can say, hey, those are all these jokes that I used to do the whole time I was hustling. And so I feel very lucky. I was connected to Little Lamb Recordings, which is run by Jason Lamb and Shonali Bomick, who are wonderful. And we recorded it at the Duplex in the West Village. And it was so much fun. And I'm so proud of it. It's bonkers to me. Every month I get a check because it's streaming on Pandora, Spotify, all this stuff. I always said, I never did comedy to make money because, if you do comedy to make money, you're a fool. But I always, I never wanted, I think some people's definition of success in comedy is when comedy pays for their life. I used to subscribe to that. And I thought, once I can quit my publishing job and only do comedy and that's how I make my money, then I'll be successful. And within a few years of thinking that way, I decided, no, that's not how I think, because I never want to demand that my art pay for my life. And I think you stop enjoying your art when you do demand that. There's a really great book by Elizabeth Gilbert that's about all this called Big Magic. It's such a phenomenal book. Have you ever read that?
I haven't.
No. Oh, it's a fantastic book, but she talks a lot about demanding that your art pay for your life and how that's a recipe to resent your art. But long way of saying, I did the album because I was just, so proud. I'd been in stand-up at that point for over 10 years. And I was like, I've seen dudes who were in it 6 months do albums. Why am I sitting on my hands? I deserve to do an album too. And, I was never motivated by the money, but I will say I one time took a trip to Aruba, all expenses paid, with money from my album. And that was the greatest trip ever. I was like, I didn't do this for the money, but when I do get the money, it feels pretty nice. Like it is powerful to every month be like, yeah, I worked so long in stand-up and this is the payoff, literally. And it's a piece of work I'm just so proud of because the beauty of an album, unlike a book, is, a book, you write the book and then it goes to a copy edit and then it goes to a legal edit and then you and your editor work on it together and maybe chop out some chapters, rewrite chapters. It's such a long road. And then it literally takes 3 months to be printed and distributed, Whereas an album, because of the technology today, it's so remarkable. Like in theory, like I recorded the album in late July of 2017. And then I sort of just chilled for the month of August. Also, our high school classmate, Jenny Kendall, passed away right around that time. Mm-hmm. And that kind of derailed. I just couldn't focus on the album at that point, and I was like, who cares? Like, I'll get back to this when I get back to it. But in theory, it's neat. Like, you can turn around an album very quickly and get it out there. And it could be topical jokes. It could be current stuff. And it's out there to be consumed. And I think that is neat, that there's no sort of delay when you're doing an album. Whereas with a book, there is a delay. These might be things that you wrote a year ago, and now it's on the printed page, and you're like, oh, yeah, okay, I remember saying that, I guess. But, with an album, I love that it can be so current, and you're like, yeah, these are jokes that I wrote 2 months ago. I recorded them in an album and then released them. It's a miracle.
I've heard that when people write a book, by the time it goes to print and gets released, they hate the book. And that's how they know, like, oh, okay, maybe the book's ready to go because I actually hate every part of this thing.
Oh, completely. By the time the new rules for blondes came out, I was like, if I have to think of another blonde pun, I'm going to die. Like, oh my God. Like, also because I wrote that book on weekends and at night. So like, it's a slow road when you're just writing it while you're working full time. It just, yeah, I felt like I was writing that book forever.
So I read the book.
Oh my God, okay. Thank you.
Well, I will tell you that I've been very enlightened by reading this book, and I do have to admit that I'm probably not the target demographic for it.
Not at all.
It is called The New Rules for Blondes, Highlights from a Fair-Haired Life. I learned a tremendous amount about hair coloring. The process for hair coloring.
Oh, yeah.
And also how to properly condition my own hair. And I will say that I've been doing it wrong. I thought that the conditioner went to the scalp. It actually, I guess, goes just to the ends of the hair.
Yeah, that is truly the most powerful takeaway from that book. And I feel like it says a lot about the quality of that book that, literally all my friends, when they read it, they're like, wow, I've been conditioning my hair wrong. And I'm like, I know. Granted, everyone has different hair texture. So there are some people for whom they got to slather on conditioner the whole way. But a lot of people should not be conditioning the roots. They should only condition the ends. And I'll tell you, when I learned that myself, I'm so glad I was able to pass that on to the people, because when I learned that myself, it was a game changer. I had great hair in high school, and that's when I learned it.
You were voted best hair.
Yeah, I was voted best hair in my high school graduating class. And there was some stiff competition in Weston. There were a lot of girls with some good hair. Yeah.
But there's another part of this book, though, and we would be remiss if we didn't talk about it, okay? And the real focus of the book is to subvert stereotypes. And it's to reject the negative connotations about being blonde. And these are the blonde jokes that we hear about being clueless, naive, gold digging. The book really empowers blondes and I think women in general by advocating that women can be self-sufficient, they can follow their dreams, and they don't need to become boxed in by these stereotypes that have been thrust upon them by society. And there's a section of the book where, and I'll quote you here, that light-haired ladies have faced patronizing prejudgment since time immemorial. We're living in an age of intelligent, self-sufficient, gutsy blondes, and blondes of today need not be defined and inhibited by the tired blonde stereotypes of yesteryear. The modern blonde should strive to be informed, self-sufficient, and above all, not helpless, and this information will help you achieve that. I thought there were a lot of great lessons out of that book for that, and I do think it's extremely impactful to empower women to say, yeah, I am amazing, and I don't care what everyone else says.
Oh, totally. Yeah, God, Fran, I'm so touched that you got that book, because I feel like a lot of people read that book and just sort of didn't get it, and I'm really impressed that you got it. But exactly, one thing in that book that I really was excited to touch on, and I did so in a tongue-in-cheek and fun and silly way, but yeah, was just the notion of I think often, especially if you're a blonde woman and you're cute, people kind of just don't take you seriously. They think you're sort of inherently unserious. I mean, in a similar way to the way that, a lot of women's writing is sort of dismissed as chick lit. And I think it's so important to be able to sort of see that and sense it, but then dismiss it. And, I remember I studied abroad with a girl, and her whole mantra, which became my mantra, I hope she doesn't mind that I stole it, but was, I am who I am without apologies. And I think it's such a great way to be, of like, some people aren't going to like you, some people are going to like you, but you're allowed to just do your thing and be happy and be unabashedly you. And who cares if people like that or don't, or understand it or don't, or agree with it or don't, I think it's so, and, I think that also connects to stand-up too, of, you're going to you're not going to be for everyone, but the people who love you are, and who understand you, that's great. And you just keep a step. I think that's one reason I'm so inspired by Hillary Clinton, is like, she knows a ton of people don't like her, and she does not care. She's roaming the woods and drinking her Chardonnay. And she's a woman of such great accomplishment, and she's done so much in her career, but her resilience I find so inspiring. And sorry, I feel like I'm kind of all over the place with this.
No, well, we don't shy from difficult conversations on the Jedburgh podcast. These are important things. They're important things for leaders, right? They're important things for, people who want to build more meaningful relationships with their families, their spouses, their significant others, their business context. You have to be able to have these difficult conversations. And you talked about it earlier in the context of the comedian who gets up and makes the joke about the uncomfortableness of the situation, right? Which then kind of disarms everybody. And we talked about this in episode 7 with author and journalist Cleo Stiller, where Cleo wrote a book called Modern Manhood, which it's about how to be what she calls a good man in the Me Too environment, in this era where you reference it with male comics, where you don't know what you can say, right? And you don't know, am I saying the right thing? Am I looking the right way at somebody? Are they interpreting what I'm saying as being sexist or elitist? Are they now going to accuse me of saying something that I didn't even know I did? And I was just trying to, how do I act like me? What is me? I don't even know what me is now. What am I supposed to be? And then you kind of get into this whirlwind where you just have no idea sometimes as a man how to act. And we talked about this concept of the man box, these preconceived notions that society has put on men. And your book and the topics that you bring up and the stereotypes about women and blonde women, and you talk a lot about brunette women too, and the relationship between, which is quite funny actually, about blondes versus brunettes and who has the upper hand in different situations. That really resonated with me because it made me think about the preconceived notions that the man box sets, where you have to say, I have to act like this way, and if I don't act like this way, then somebody's going to think that I'm, quote, not a man, right? And but really, what is that? And so I think about gender equality. You reference gender equality in comedy, and I think about a lot of what Cleo talked about in finding the path to gender equality is through becoming good humans. And when we create an environment, well, you have to be a good man and you have to be a good woman, and we're going to do these things in these two separate pillars, we really can't get there. But when we come together and we say, well, we're just going to focus on being good humans who are going to do what's right regardless of the gender, then we can bridge that gap. And so I'm interested in your thoughts of that, because you are a self-proclaimed feminist, and which I think is amazing, and how you've tied that into the book. You've tied that into your comedy, and you've talked about it here. And so I'm interested in your thoughts on this good human concept.
Yeah, totally. I've had some conversations with my more conservative friends about notions of maleness and notions of femaleness. And because I think there is a misapprehension that the goal of feminism is, that like women can do exactly what men can do. And, that as though it's some sort of oppression of men and boosting of women. When in fact, the goal of feminism is to get rid of these really rigid notions of what is man and what is woman. And because they're not doing anyone any favors. You were explaining the man box. Yeah, the man box denies men their humanity. It denies them the ability to emote and to be vulnerable and to cry, or, and it demands that they be the breadwinner and that they handle the physical brutality. And that is negative for men and women alike.
One of the points in the man box is literally, do not be like a woman,
Yeah. Oh, exactly. I mean, yeah. I mean, that also puts it a hierarchy where men are at the top and women are submissive to that. And yeah, and women are, it would be embarrassing to be like a woman. It would be embarrassing to have any traits that are considered feminine, such as, being emotional, being open emotionally or vulnerable. But yeah, I mean, that's bad for everyone. So exactly. I mean, I think it's so important, yeah, just to hone in on being, yeah, a good human and really reject the stereotypical, those rigid notions of male, female, and who's allowed to be what. I mean, I have a number of friends whose husbands are stay-at-home dads. And, sometimes I'll tell more conservative friends and they're like, whoa, so the woman's the breadwinner and the guy just stays at home. And I think this is a great trend. Like, I love that I know so many families whose structure is that. But some older people are just sort of thrown for a loop. And it's too bad because it's like, from what I see, these guys love being home with their kids. They love not having the responsibility for the financial future of the family be only on their shoulders. And the women are go-getters and they love going out to work. And, I mean, everyone needs to be permitted to do what works for them. And I mean, for me, like, I don't want to have kids. And some people say, oh, that sort of means they'll kind of disparage that, or they'll be like, well, you're not a real woman if you don't have kids. Like the whole women are maternal and women want to have kids. And plenty of us don't. And, I think it's so important that we broaden the notion of, yeah, like we can all just be good humans. And maybe for some people that means you're a woman and you have kids. For some people that means you're a woman, you don't have kids. For some people that means you're a man and you stay at home. Or, I mean, it's so many different pathways. And I think it's just so important to try to not judge anyone's pathway. Just like, okay, that works for them. Cool. Let it ride.
So can we challenge a couple of other stereotypes? So I've created a little segment here, right? A little rapid fire segment where I'm going to throw out some stereotypes about blonde women that I pulled from the book. So I didn't make these up. Okay. And I'm going to try to stay quiet. I'm going to throw them out. And then I want you to just give me, you can refute it or you could acknowledge it, right? And you just tell me the first thing that comes to your mind. And we'll run through this list. Okay, ready?
Yeah.
Number 1, light hair presumes idiocy.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. I don't know. Like, sometimes I look at the Real Housewives of whatever city, and it's like, ooh, like there's a whole lot of light blonde in there, and they're not having the super in-depth combos.
Okay. Number 2, blondes will catch your eye, and they're easy targets.
Oh, completely. Oh, yeah. I mean, I feel like often, especially in comedy, if somebody wants to like portray someone as like a stupid bitch or a Karen, it's always going to be a blonde. Like, people sort of love to dog on a blonde.
Photos of blonde women in social media generate the most click traffic.
This is true. Yeah, my friend literally used to work in social media, and he would say he wanted to have an article, like people click on it and it go viral. They would often put a completely unrelated photo of a blonde woman next to it. And that would truly, I mean, it's bonkers the way that works, but it truly does in the algorithm.
Okay, last one. Barbie was a party girl.
Yeah, she was, 100%. I wonder if there is some correlation between being a young girl who plays with Barbies and being in a sorority. I don't know. Because for me, that was the pathway, truly. Both things.
All right, I'm going to give you one more because I just thought of it. Blondes are not to be fucked with.
Yeah, I agree with that too. I mean, I think, yeah, depending on the kind of blonde, whether it's, I know we've talked about like the warm, or in the book, I talk about like the sort of warm blonde versus the icy blonde. And there are sort of blondes to not be fucked with in each category, because the sort of brassy blonde, she's kind of trashy. She'll fight. Oh, she will. And then the icy one, she's probably a wasp and she will just stare you out and make sure you don't get into the country club.
And you actually have a really good story in your album, and I think you mentioned it in the book too, about chasing down some folks after they thought you could be taken advantage of and tempted to rob you, and you actually chased them down.
Yeah, it was truly like one of the greatest nights of my life. It was the night before Thanksgiving, when everyone's like, let's go meet up at a bar and bump into high school people. And yeah, this guy mugged me and he was on a bike and he took my purse. And it was like an out-of-body experience. I mean, I remember being like, my purse. And then I just chased him down, knocked him off his bike, and got my purse back. And I mean, the Boston PD were like, oh my God. Like, they were so, but I was like, yeah, I'm sure that this guy thought I was an easy target. I was wearing high heels. I was probably visibly drunk, out for the night, I'm sure this kid sized me up and was like, nice. Okay, here we go. And I think he was bewildered when I fought back.
We didn't expect that. I mean, nobody expected that. You probably didn't even expect to react like that. It's just an immediate emotion, right? I'm going to go after him.
Exactly. I mean, that's the thing. I think people love to say, oh, if I were ever, the victim of a crime, here's what I would do. And it's like, you don't know. You have no idea how you'll react. And I mean, I was sort of stunned by myself, but also extremely proud of myself.
So in comedy, like in so many things, right, you can't go at it alone. You need some sort of support structure. And there's this audience factor to this. And there's your personal brand. You talked about your voice. You talked about having to figure out who you were, how you presented yourself. We talked about audiences in episode 5 with Emily Sandberg Gold. We've talked about it at various times since then as well. But you have to define an audience based on who you are, not necessarily based on what you think people want to see and how people may perceive you. And it's more impactful to have an audience of 10 people who are there to listen to what you have to say versus 100 people who don't care what you have to say. And I think that's probably really most true in comedy because of that instantaneous feedback. And if you have 100 people in the room who don't care what you have to say, it ends up being that awful set. If you have 10 people who are laughing their heads off and engaging with you, then it could be the greatest time, even though it's so many less people. So how have you thought about defining your brand, defining your audience, and what's that process look like? Because that's a long process.
Yeah, it is. I mean, the first step is even finding your voice. And I remember when I was young in comedy, people would talk about finding your voice, and I never really understood it. And it took me years. Like, I think often as a woman, especially based on how I was raised, I found it almost hard to feel like I deserved the audience's time and that I deserved the microphone and that like some people just burst into comedy and they feel like, yep, I deserve to be here. I'm owed this time. You got to pay attention to me. And for me, it was a long road to feel like entitled to this audience's time. But then, I mean, I think it often, at least for me, it took a couple of years to even find my voice, find the stuff I like to talk about generally, find the way I like to be on stage, and I mean, there's like mechanical stuff of like, do you lean against the stool? Do you bring a drink on stage? Do you not? What do you wear? But then the larger idea of that, of like, how do you find your people? Like, how do you make sure that your people who would like your comedy are able to find your comedy? And I always admire people, especially, eons ago. I mean, Dane Cook was like the king of MySpace comedy and promoting himself on MySpace and really connecting with people. And, I have friends who they would take email addresses at the end of the show and, create an email list and to inform people. And I mean, there's so many ways to promote yourself, and it can be hard to find your audience. But now because of social media, it's really changed the way that, an audience can find you, which is really very cool. And I've had people find me in so many different ways. I mean, I have a Twitter and an Instagram account where I pretend to be the New York Times wedding section called NYT Vows. And I think I'm always so amazed by people who will find that, and kind of enjoy my jokes on there and get my persona on there. Like, I mean, I think that I'm always sort of so excited when anyone wants to enjoy my comedy. Or, I remember years ago, I used to run a show at the Duplex just in the bar area. And I remember one time we were about to start the show. It was me and my friend Lauren co-produced this show called Bitchcraft. And and I went over to these people who were sitting at a table by the bar, and I was like, just so you know, we're going to start a show in about 30 minutes, and because the bar area of the Duplex, it's usually people expect like, piano, show tunes, karaoke, and we were a live show. And I was like, just so you know, sorry, but we're going to start a show in about 30 minutes. And these people were like, yeah, we're here for it. And I was just like, oh my God.
Like, what do you mean?
I know. I was like, you're here and to see my show and you don't know me? Oh my God. Like, I just think so often I just have such sort of low expectations. So I don't know, anyone enjoying my stuff, I just find so cool and lovely. And, it's such a wonderful way of connecting with people and a wonderful way to feel understood. And I think to me, that's the most wonderful thing in life is feeling understood and, and feeling like people really get you and they get your jokes.
And that success is earned.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Through hard work.
Exactly. Yeah. Like years and years, comedy is something you learn 10 minutes at a time over the course of decades, and it's such a long slog. But yeah, I mean, and there's no substitute for it. Overnights, there's no such thing as an overnight sensation. I mean, the person probably put in the work quietly for so long. I mean, Sarah Cooper, I've known for a long time, who, is like blowing up with her Trump lip syncing. I mean, she was hustling in the New York comedy scene for a long time. She wrote 2 books. Like, yeah, I mean, all this stuff. Yeah, it's like, what is it? Opportunity meets preparation. Like, and there you go. And then you can do a 45-minute set or an hour-long set because you've been working towards this for a decade or 15 years or 20 years.
So we got to close out, and I want to get from you the 3 things that make you successful every single day. And we quantify this in terms of the Jedburghs in World War II and the fact that they had to do 3 things consistently every single day as the foundational elements of their jobs. They had to be able to shoot, they had to be able to move, and they had to be able to communicate. If they did these 3 foundational elements every day, it didn't matter what challenges came their way. They could be successful and find solutions to those challenges because they were grounded in these 3 core things. What are the 3 core things that you do every day to be successful?
God, I mean, I know this first one is not unique, and I think it's shared by a number of your guests, but make your bed every morning. That is like, I remember my dad teaching me that, and it is a game changer, because, yeah, you've accomplished something. Also, everything looks better. I mean, I'm a total neatnik and really into having things be like clean and organized. But I'd say make your bed every day. For me, I have to go outside a little bit every day. Like, I know people where it'll be a gorgeous day and they want to stay in and watch a movie. And like, I would break out in hives. Like I have to, especially if the sun is out, I need to be out at some point. And I would every day I just try to be upbeat and positive and also be aware of what I want coming into my life. I enjoy being on Twitter, but especially in the morning, I'm like, I can't watch certain things on Twitter. If there's an autoplay and it's a police, something like, a violent scene, I can't watch that. So like, I just try to be aware of what I'm consuming and participating in as far as even like media or portrayals of violence. Like, I just find that really hard to take. So make your bed, get outside at some point and try to be upbeat and positive is what I think about every day.
I like that. Thank you. So we talked about the 9 characteristics as defined by Special Operations Forces, and we talked about how everybody who is an elite performer exudes all 9 of these at various points in time. And I classify everybody at the end of this show. And for me, when I look at you, I think about adaptability and the ability to adjust one's behavior to the situation, because you have demonstrated this in comedy. There's this always changing world, these new themes, these new inflection points, and you have to constantly draw on those in the moment in front of an audience. You have to be adaptable, but then also in your sets over time. And to be successful over such a long career, is you've had to be able to constantly be adaptable and iterate. You have a series of podcasts, 2 wick minimum. I want to mention it. Okay, which is quite funny. All about candles. So if you're a candle lover,
it's right? Not a joke. People usually think it's a joke that I have that podcast, but it's a real podcast.
It is. And if we can find the audience members who like the Jedburgh podcast and 2 wick minimum, that would be even more.
Wow,
impactful.
It's the Venn diagram is a sliver.
Yeah, that overlap might be small. And you've been involved in a lot of other projects, and we didn't even really talk about your day job as a publisher and how you have your real work as a director of editorial. And so that's truly impactful to change the lives of young adults who are studying for the SATs, looking at colleges. And these are publications that you're kicking out every year on year. And you've been there for 13 years. And so that's truly amazing. And an author. And that takes an incredible amount of adaptability, because you mentioned opportunity. You find opportunity, you analyze it, and then you chart a path to seize it. But despite these opportunities, despite this adaptability to succeed in different fields, I truly believe that you've remained true to yourself. You know who you are in the heart, and you stick to that. And that, to me, is the definition of elite talent. It's truly remarkable. And I thank you so much for joining me on the Jedburgh podcast.
Thank you so much, Fran. I had a blast. This has been a wonderful conversation. And gosh, you do your homework, man. I'm so impressed by you.
We don't make it easy.
Yeah. You make it look easy. Yeah. But this has been so much fun. And thank you. I mean, this is all really fascinating. All the, the sort of tenets of this elite just performance. It's really neat.
We'll do it again.
Awesome.
All right.
Thank you so much.
American Jedburghs went on to form the foundation of the United States Special Forces and the Special Activities Directorate of the Central Intelligence Agency. Thanks for listening to the Jedburgh podcast. I'm your host, Fran. We're brought to you by the Talent War Group, an executive search firm and talent advisory. We'll drive you to attract, retain, and develop top talent. With services like talent acquisition, leadership development, and keynote speeches, we work with you to create talent solutions to business problems. To get started, visit talentwargroup.com. Join us next week for a new episode of the Jedburgh podcast on Spotify, Apple, Stitcher, and iHeartRadio, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you like what you heard, give us a like and leave a review. Follow me, Fran, the Talent War Group, and the Jedburgh podcast on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, and send your comments and inquiries to media@talentwargroup.com. As former members of Special Operations Forces, the Jedburgh podcast and the Talent War Group contribute a percentage of all profits to the Special Operations Warrior Foundation, supporting the families of our fallen warriors. Thanks for joining us on this episode. How you prepare today determines success tomorrow.